Hello everyone, I am here with Sophie McCarthy from McCarthy Mentoring. I am so pleased to be here talking to you, about mentoring, as well as about your business, McCarthy Mentoring. So given that your passion and your business is all about mentoring, I'd love for you to tell me who was the first mentor in your life?
Probably my mum, Wendy, who has had a big career in Australia, but she started like as a teacher, and I think she had she probably didn't call them mentors then, but people that took an interest in her life throughout her career, and she had always offered that sort of advice to people and often my friends, but she was very inspirational. She's very driven, got a lot of energy. And then I had a couple of other people who were people in fields that I was interested in. So I did a Bachelor of Arts and majored in politics and history, went to ANU. I was always interested in humanities, and I worked actually in museums. My first job was working in maritime history in Darwin. I learnt to dive and I wrote a report on World War II shipwrecks. So
Oh, wow.
that was a job that a part-time job I had at uni. But I was also very interested in health. I always wanted to help people. I think I wanted to be a social worker or something that did stuff with people, and I think I grew up in a family that was very focused on equity and activism and how to make the world a better place. So trying to articulate what that meant and find a career that did that. I ended up doing a master's in public health, and I worked in research and policy, improving health services for about 6 years in Canberra and Sydney, and did a lot of programs around that. And I also volunteered for something called the International Women's Development Agency when I was in my 20s, and I really wanted to work overseas. I'd travelled a bit when I finished uni in a lot of Latin America, and I guess I was very struck by the inequity. It sounds silly to say that now, but it was probably the first time in my life that I'd seen such extreme poverty. And then I spent a lot of time in Nepal and India and trying to understand how that could be improved. And I think we know that with good health and education, people can reach their potential. So I had a mentor who was a woman who had worked, she was a family friend really, but she'd worked in the health department, and she actually took me on a work trip of hers to Laos and Vietnam, where I got to actually see what she did as a health educator. She was reviewing programs where they were distributing contraception through an Australian government program. And so I got to sort of really think, is that me? Do I want to do that? Because I think that's really what mentoring is about, inspiration, support, a role model, and someone that's not perhaps your best friend, not your boss, not your, often in your inner circle, someone that's a bit objective and that can give you that sort of wise counsel.
How far along your career did you lean on your mum to be your mentor and guiding you? Because a lot of us kind of repel from what our parents tell us.
Both my parents were very encouraging of going away to uni, go somewhere else, and just do a broad degree that's going to help you, write and think and, be a more analytical thinker, and then you can focus on, what profession you want to do or what sort of vocational path. And they're very independent people who really created a lot of their own opportunities. I always would test things with my mum and my dad. My father was much more commercial. He was an accountant, and then he was a business consultant, and he set up a lot of businesses, whereas my mum she was a teacher, and then she was very involved in advocacy, and she was on a lot of public sector, roles, committees, and both of them reinvented themselves a lot when I look back, and they had lots of different lives. Like my dad was, worked for Coopers, then he was an accountant, then he bought businesses, then he was a farmer, and he sort of wanted to do all of those things at once. I always assumed that I would be if I was a parent, if I was fortunate enough to be able to have kids, that I would always work as well, that I didn't have to give one up. My parents had a very equitable marriage. My dad always did as much housework as my mum. They shared childcare, and
wow,
that was not that common then.
Yeah,
My
it's
father
amazing.
always encouraged my mother to go back to work, which
Yeah.
in fact I think initially she didn't really want to. Once you have that shared experience, I was leaving a role and I had my third baby. My third child was a baby, and I had a contract to write a report on women's leadership in science and engineering. I went to borrow a desk at Mum's office, which was nearby my house, and I said, "What's all this mentoring work you do? That's really interesting." She said, "Oh yeah, I run some mentoring programs for a couple of investment banks and a law firm." And then it was actually my father that said, "Why don't you two work together?" So we then worked together for 5 years and built McCarthy Mentoring. It wasn't called McCarthy Mentoring then, so we created that name and grew the business, and then I bought the business from her 10 years ago. Firstly, it was amazing to work with your mother. We had to re-navigate our relationship as workers. I'd never worked in a small business before, neither had she really. So you have a lot of trust when you work with your family. So I looked a lot at what they'd done and how it can be fantastic. And then fortunately for me, Mum said, "Well, I want to go and do other things." So I said, "Yeah, took me about a year to get to that point." It wasn't really a negotiating tactic, but I found it very stressful at the time to think, "Oh, how am I gonna run a business?" But I worked it out.
At that time,
I have lent a lot on my husband, who is a corporate lawyer and has run businesses for 40 years. I am in the very fortunate position to run a mentoring business where we have about 100 people that work as mentors and coaches with us. That's our work, in that we assign people to work with people for 6 and 12-month programs, but I know them all very well. But I did also have different mentors. So you get really good at asking for help, and if you don't, I don't think you survive.
yeah, I agree. Do you have any advice for people in terms of how you do ask for help when it feels a bit uncomfortable to start with?
You just got to think about what's holding you back. We all need support. There's never a dumb question. People are really generous with their time. People are very generous if you are respectful and polite and respectful of people's time. I'd really like your insights on these 3 things. Have some purpose and structure to it. People are really open to helping you. I go and meet with our competitors, I go and meet with our clients, our customers, and then there's a whole lens around your own professional development. And I do that every year, on my own and also with my team. We all have to sit down and think about our goals. And most people have professional development plans. Do you actually make them come to life? And a lot of that is often around sharing your goals with other people who are in your network, or thinking about people that you need to know, or who needs to know you, who needs to know the work that you do for you to be successful.
How do you capture and share your goals with others?
Well, we actually have this goal setting card game which we developed 15 years ago, and it's online now as well as part of our programs. And so every year, as the beginning sort of first step of all our programs, we get people to choose 10 of these 60 goals. It's actually just a really fun and creative process that you spread them all out, and you have to actually select 10 goals for the year as part of your program, and then you work with your mentor to think through, well, how am I actually going to achieve those? What's the time frame? What does a successful outcome look like? You can add on all parts of it, but with any program around your development, you always need to have some goals and think they might change. They probably will. But it's always really helpful to start by thinking, what are they? Well-being ones, just, I suppose, more professional, some around your team. And if you're not meeting them, a few months in, like, what do you need to change? I take a photo with my phone of my 10 goals. I should have a vision board.
Then do you like show people, or you quite clear as the purpose when you go and ask for help?
There's very clear research that shows that if you articulate and share your goals, you're 40% more likely to achieve them. But that goes up to 70% if you actually have a mentor or someone that holds you to account. So it's pretty compelling. And it then just becomes sort of built into you as that lens.
How often do you think it's good to reevaluate your goals?
At least every year. Kind of possibly depends on what's going on in your life. Having a reset regularly is useful, and I guess the calendar year or the end of the financial year for my business, strategically and commercially, and probably with my team about what are we going to need. So we do set a lot of goals then, but personally I always do it in January.
How often would it change?
Some are sort of constants, like exercise or committing time to relationships with friends. There's always a couple, like, do you want to do the company director's course this year, or are you selling your business, or are you expanding into a different country? I just have a few constants about always making sure that I'm having fun, whatever that means. That could be travel. I took up golf in COVID. That could be the exercise has to be part of my life, spending time with my family. But now they're all grown up.
So your youngest son recently finished school?
Yes, he did.
How does that feel?
Fabulous. It feels like you're just going into a new phase of life. My husband and I, we got married, we got engaged after we'd known each other for 6 weeks, and within a year of knowing each other, we were married and pregnant. So when I look at our lives together, we've had 3 children, and they've all gone through school, finished school, and so now it's like we've got this time again on our own. You don't have that sense of responsibility in the morning. I still haven't really, I've had this great sense of just this weight goes off your shoulders, and it's also just all this detail that you carry around in your brain about all their, have they chosen those subjects, all those deadlines that school has. But I don't think I've appreciated yet quite what I might do this year. I wanted to have more holidays doing, walks and hikes and just exploring the world. But this year, I don't know, I'm like, I love what I do. I want to stay working for decades to come. I probably do about a day's work a week with the Sydney Community Foundation, which I chair. We both have really big extended families that, we spend a lot of time. Health, exercise, sport, fun. You've got to carve out time. It's about, I suppose, being a bit more intentional and purposeful about how I use my time.
How do you do that? A lot of women are wondering how to be able to be more intentional about their time.
I think it's actually comes back to setting goals and being really honest and brutally disciplined about how you go about that. So even just some quick reflection on how do you spend your hours in your week. And if you spend 5 days a week at work, then you've got 2 days on the weekend. Like, just looking at the hours that you've got in a day and a week helps you do that at a micro level. But at a macro level, that's why you set goals at the beginning of the year, because you think, okay, I've got 12 months. Do I want to, run a marathon, or do I want to be in a new job? Do I want to find a new partner? So what do I need to do to make those things happen? Once you focus on those things, like, that takes up all the time. And so maybe it's coming back to your vision board and things like that, having that really close all the time to say, how am I going? You only get one life, don't you? And it's really important that you do get to reflect on what it is that how you want to contribute to that. And do you want to be a passenger, or do you want to steer it? I was probably always really good at making short-term goals. I never had a view particularly of where am I going to be in 5 years. But I was always quite clear on I want to go to uni because I wanted to have a great experience. I lived on campus and I wanted that to be really fun, and it was. Then I wanted to travel and work overseas and live overseas. I didn't do that for very long, but I did it for about a year. And then it was about just getting more skills and education to get a job that, would pay my bills, that I felt was interesting. I worked in lots of not-for-profits, I worked in government, and then later I worked in consulting, and now the last 15 years I've worked, for myself or with my mum, in McCarthy Mentoring, which has been diverse. I really want to go overseas in 2 years' time, and so I was always quite good at doing that, or I'm going to get fit.
Your business works with business leaders and emerging leaders. What sort of programs and services that you offer?
So all the programs are 6 or 12 months where we meet with you, understand a bit about your career, your background, what your role is now, where you want to go in the next year or two. We connect you with one of the mentors or coaches in our network, which is a global network. Much of that can be done virtually, so it actually makes it a lot more efficient, greater choice of mentors, particularly in a country as big as Australia. We have an online platform that sends you a sort of a module each month around different themes of leadership.
You mentioned that there's about 100 mentors. What's their typical background?
They've all had a high degree of success in their lives. Most of them have held executive roles, so many of them have been CEOs, they're company directors, they run their own businesses, they're in every kind of profession. The best mentor is someone that's worked in a variety of areas often, because they have a great, I think, helping people in leadership roles understand difference. If you've worked in government and corporate, you've just got a broader understanding of different workplace cultures and different drivers and motivators. But the best mentor is someone that listens really well, who's generous with their time, who's honest. And then there's a very broad, some people need a lot of support and encouragement, and you might just be a bit stuck and a bit complacent. If you want to get to X, then you actually need to do these 3 things to do that, or it's not going to happen. People, even your boss, unless you're pretty lucky, doesn't often really tell you that.
Yeah.
And your partner doesn't often want to tell you that either.
Which is why I think it's really admirable that you were able to work with your mum for so long and build a really successful business as a result of that. A lot of people would love to be able to, but also know that there's so much passion in building a business.
I worked about 3 days a week when I started, and then that built up more and more. We travelled a lot. We ran a lot of programs like all around Australia. We were doing programs with Qantas and performing arts, a lot of Indigenous arts companies at the time, electricity companies.
Is there any interest from your children in following the McCarthy mentoring model of the business being passed on and grown by the next generation?
Look, potentially. Potentially. That would be wonderful. But I do have a cousin working with me. We are a very tight team of people.
Where do you see the next area that you'd like to focus on for yourself?
So I've done some of the coaching courses, but in the next 2 years, I'd probably like to do a bit more study in that area, but also in governance. So I chair the Sydney Community Foundation. I've done the not-for-profit company directors course. As we all know, when we do those sorts of programs, you meet other people who are doing, studying those things at the same time. We run a lot of leadership programs, so we do learn a lot every time. Every cohort brings a different set of challenges, and it's so fantastic. You learn so much about yourself and other people when you run those programs, because you're with a cohort of people that come through and are exploring all those things themselves. We're sort of like stewards. We always say we want to grow more, but We actually have quite a small team that runs it, and we're very good at bringing in a lot of experts and consultants to help us when we need them for certain programs. We do have a lot of relationships with different groups around the world that we tap into, like the University of Michigan. We work with a group sort of similar to us there. With work we do in the US. I'm always learning, Natalie.
Yeah.
I'm always learning.
You give off that energy of being able to do all of that and leading the team, and you're all having fun and doing great work.
I've always prioritised fun and holidays and spending time with my family. Like I'm not a person that has worked 100-hour weeks. I'm usually very concerned when I meet people in organisations who do that. There's a great cost to your health and your relationships, and you're really just not that effective when you work those crazy hours. I've just always had very clear views that you don't send emails out of work hours. I don't ever expect my team to work weekends. They take 4 to 6 weeks leave a year. I want them to have a life. When people give up so much for work, they end up getting sick, or they end up really resenting work.
Do you have any advice for women going through midlife change? Do you think this is a new era for women at this stage of life?
It comes back to, like, think of the things that you can control. Everyone to some degree has some control and over their health. Your health is incredibly important. And so, like with Jacinda, you know, she's like, I've got nothing. I've got nothing left.
Yeah.
Like, that is an extraordinary privilege to be the Prime Minister of a country. I think the average CEO is in the role about 3 years now. So I think we are working much longer lives. We work long hours, and that has a cost. I've been on a few not-for-profit boards in the last 25 years, and I was always really shocked when there'd be people on boards for 20 years. A lot of not-for-profits, it's often around fundraising, and you have to really think about how you're going to raise funds. My view is get in, do your work and get off. No one's indispensable. After 7 years, you've pretty much tapped everyone that's going to give you money for those things. So yeah, I don't really see the value in doing it for an incredibly long time. Having said that, I'm now clocking up about 15 years in what I'm doing, but I suppose when you own your own thing, it's slightly different. And in consulting, you know, you're working with different organisations every year, so it keeps it it's always exciting and new and different.
Yeah.
But a lot of people's jobs can potentially be like that. But just coming back to a question about women and looking at, you know, the next phase of their life. So I'm 55 this year, and so I look at a lot of my friends who are similar to me, that, you know, their kids are leaving home, finishing school. So look after your finances, because as we know in Australia, poverty is a 55-year-old woman actually who doesn't have superannuation, and it only takes, you know, one health problem or one, you know, you lose a job or you get divorced, and that can damage your financial situation for the rest of your life, which at 55, it's really hard to, you know, rebuild that. And I've seen that a lot. So I think that's another thing my parents always were very clear on, like, always have some financial independence, because no one else can really do that for you.
I agree.
And I think your health.
Yeah.
Your health at our stage in life is so important. It helps you manage menopause and all those things that, you know, sleep, and it's great for your brain and just keeping you calm. Like, I run, and I try every time I've had an injury and I can't run for a while, I really, really notice just the impact on my just well-being and, you know, how you manage stress and things like that. Getting sick stops you being able to engage in all the fun bits of life and work.
Yeah.
And it's also really expensive too if you know, you're really unwell. So looking after your finances and your well-being and are so important. And then just having a bit of a daydream. I mean, having a bit of being really creative and thinking about what you want to do the next 10 years. You know, what's the kind of life that you want to live? Like be creative, but also be really disciplined about asking yourself those questions like, well, how much do I need to earn? If I quit my job tomorrow, what else would I do? And what are the things that, you know, kind of give me joy and make me feel happy and successful? They probably change, you know, maybe they're not probably the things that they were when you were 25.
So my takeaways from this conversation is have lots of fun, but make sure that you know what your goals are. If you don't know, figure it out. And that can help, you know, by talking to people, and even if they hold a mirror up to you to guide you down a path of actually figuring it out, as long as it gives you the ability to look after your health and healthy finances as well. That's really important because you've only got one life.
Whether you're in the passenger seat or in the driver's seat, you know, embrace your ambition and think carefully about, what brings you joy and how you want to contribute. And don't be afraid to ask other people for advice and take the plunge, jump off the cliff.
Such great advice, and it's been so good chatting with you. How
Thank
can
you,
people
Natalie.
find out and follow what you're up to about your business?
You can follow us on LinkedIn,
Yeah.
on McCarthy Mentoring, or jump onto our website, www.mccarthymentoring.
Thanks so much, Sophie.
Thank you.